Hello, and welcome to my channel. Now that the official pictures and information have been released regarding the Rings of Power series from Amazon, I am in a position to give my thoughts on what has been revealed. First of all, given the current climate, my expectations for this series were very low, and therefore I cannot say I am either disappointed or surprised by what I have seen. It is very unlikely that anyone working for a major corporation today would have the correct mindset to produce work in the same vein or tone as what Tolkien has done. Tolkien stated quite plainly that his work was rooted in Christianity, particularly Catholic Christianity, and his love for Western civilization. A person who hates God and Western civilization and who sees them as negatives to be destroyed will most certainly not be able to write like Tolkien or make a faithful live-action adaptation of his work. For more on this matter, see my entry on how to write like J.R.R. Tolkien. So I had no expectations to be dashed, but I find it unfortunate that something like this is being made and that something like this will be the first exposure many people have to what they might presume is the world of Middle-earth. When those posters came out, I knew that this series would not be good, or a sincere attempt to adapt and depict Tolkien's work. The costumes are simple and cheap-looking, and I wonder how that was the best they could do with their multi-million-dollar budget. I suppose the problem is not lack of money, so much as lack of ingenuity and creativity. The next issue is the fake and forced diversity. That is really all it takes for me to know that their intent is not to make a faithful and accurate depiction of Tolkien's work. I would say it's the tip of the iceberg, and when it comes to icebergs, you must stay clear, as the part below the water is far larger and more expansive than the part above. Similarly, I don't need to watch this series to know that it will be full of subversion and misrepresentation. If they fail to correctly adhere to so simple a matter as demographics, you may be sure that they will not adhere correctly to the more complex and subtle matters of the original source material. Now, just by talking about this, I will probably be characterized as some sort of ist or phobe, and there is always some assertion of why can't they be diverse? Tolkien stated clearly that the events of Lord of the Rings and Silmarillion are set in Europe during a mythological age. Because of that, the demographics should be similar to what one would find in the Poetic Edda or the Kalevala, which is basically the demographics of ancient Europe plus mythological life forms. Ancient Europe was not a racially diverse place, though there were a multitude of different cultures present. Medieval Europe was also not a racially diverse place, and from the folklore of the medieval period and attempts to depict other parts of the world, it becomes obvious that they had no idea what people looked like in other parts of the world. There is actually significant overlap between Tolkien's mythology and medieval European mythology, but I will save elaboration on that for another entry. What is wrong with depicting stories and myths in accordance with the original intent and descriptions? Any deviation from the original story and you are not depicting the story. To ask for faithful adherence to the source material and accuracy does not mean one hates other groups or wish them ill. It is a basic standard and should be taken as such. If Hollywood took an Aztec myth and depicted it with 21st century American demographics, it would be equally ludicrous and would deservedly fail, as this endeavor most likely will. Now I would like to address the Vanity Fair article in particular. The fact that they would choose such an outlet to reveal this information is a clear indicator of who their target audience is. The first thing I would ask is, why is Galadriel fighting? Whoever decided to make her fight has clearly not read Laws and Customs of the Eldar, which states that women typically take on the healing roles while men take on the fighting. The women can fight, and they do if forced to, but that is not their main role. According to Laws and Customs of the Eldar, the elves believe that one cannot be a fighter and a healer, and everyone must go in one direction or the other. It is true that Galadriel is very strong physically, but apart from tearing down Dol Guldur, I have not seen any references to her fighting, and Dol Guldur was torn down after the war was over. I think this has more to do with working in some kind of narrative than trying to accurately depict the character of Galadriel. I have to say, the costumes do not look good, and the characters do not look good. None of this makes me want to watch this product, even if I did not know what it was supposed to be. Nothing here looks particularly good or interesting or in any way unique, original, and eye catching. Even though this is a high budget film, it looks low budget. Game of Thrones is mentioned 5 times in the article, which is concerning. How is Game of Thrones any sort of successor to Lord of the Rings? It is not, and anyone who thinks they are in the same vein does not understand Tolkien and is not a real fan. I don't believe that R. R. Martin has the same audience as J. R. R. Tolkien. I find these assertions indicative of a gross lack of understanding. Jeff Bezos is mentioned 4 times. If it has to be stated that he's a fan of Tolkien and obsessed, then it's probably because all evidence will indicate the contrary. These sorts of statements look like attempts to establish credibility. I don't know Bezos personally, and I do not begrudge him for being rich and successful, but I also do not believe he's a fan. At best, he saw something that could potentially make billions of dollars and decided to take advantage of it. But from what I've seen thus far, it looks like this production is not made by fans or for fans. It looks like an attempt to produce a generic propaganda reel and get people to pay for it based on name recognition. That is probably why they waited for so long to release images and details. They must have known in advance that the reactions would not be good. In spite of everything which this series appears to be getting wrong, they are correct in depicting dwarf women with no beards. I know some people are saying the lack of beards is inaccurate, but nowhere in Lord of the Rings or the appendices or the Silmarillion does it say that dwarf women had beards. If you are a Tolkien fan, you should know that this idea of dwarf women having beards was suggested in the Peter Jackson movies and is not in the books. While the Peter Jackson movies were not so bad and fairly decent as movies go, they are not canon to the written literature. There are no bearded women, but the dwarf women are not seen because they typically do not travel, as travel and trade are largely men's work. Finally, I do think there is a missed opportunity. It would be nice to see what is happening in other parts of the Middle Earth, which are not depicted on the maps in the front of the books. Those parts do exist, and if there is an interest in having a non European cast, that would be a very easy way to do it without going against established canon. What is going on elsewhere in Middle Earth? I have done a fair bit of research on this, and information about the other parts of Middle Earth is relatively scant, but because of that, there would be significant opportunities for writing new stories set in those places, which wouldn't conflict with established canon. It might be interesting to do a story about Nguyen or the Astari who went into the east and south, but of course, since Tolkien is dead and no longer able to offer input, there is no way any new material can be considered canon. And I would just as soon not watch anything new being produced by Hollywood at this point. Thanks for listening.